Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. On this Monday evening, it's actually nice and well, it's not quite warm, but it's not cold. As you can tell, we're going to cover a guy named Stanley Allen Meyers, or better known on the internet as Stan Meyers, for those of you who have studied his inventions. It's going to be a controversial topic because they're all over this dude because he showed off what he did. If you're not familiar with this guy, Stan Meyers, I believe, was a farmer with a minor in engineering degree who essentially saw, I think he believed in one of the interviews I saw him, he believed that the peak oil issue was real. He also just didn't like the fact that oil pollutes nature, which is good. We believe that on this show too. And so he set out to get hydrogen out of water. And in a way that he could do it at a ratio where the amount of hydrogen released from the water when combusted and turned back into a fuel was more energy in the end than the energy he spent to free the hydrogen from the water. Remember, water is H2O, 2 parts hydrogen. Now, I just looked up his Wikipedia because I wanted to know kind of what the official story is, because if I don't give you the official story as written, then people jump all over the video and say, yeah, but. Okay. Now, I've mentioned Stan Meyers in several different episodes, but always as a little a la carte thing in relation to something else we're talking about. He has been on my list of episodes to cover since season 3, and I just never quite felt right for it, in terms of getting it all laid down and sort of what are the other controversies, because telling you what this guy accomplished in his lifetime is not going to fill a whole hour without boring you to death with schematics and pointing and saying what's going on. But Stan, here's what's interesting. You're going to have two sides to this coin. The side that is his videotaped archive of everything he's ever done, where he wanted you to see it. You're going to see him have a VW van he took across the United States on this engine. People accused him of hiding normal fuel on that vehicle, gasoline-based fuel. And so he said, all right, touche, pain in the butt. But then he built a dune buggy made of pipes. And he had the engine fully exposed the entire time, such that any human being, a little child, could survey all of the piping roll bars and make sure that there wasn't a fuel tube, which would have to be very, fairly substantial. I mean, a fuel tube's at least half an inch thick, right? A little over a centimeter thick. No such thing. So finally, people started believing him. Stan had a workshop, and he went through several processes, probably many of which we haven't seen, but he had a sort of round water tank sample of his technology using 2 generators that used plug energy from the wall that proved to him that for every half amp he put in, he got 650 amps worth of fuel out when converted back into a combustible nature. He took that to the patent office to prove that it worked. And they didn't believe him because the first 2 laws of thermodynamics refute this idea that less energy could produce more energy. Isn't it nice? They built it into the patent office that certain things are impossible, and therefore if it's ever created, such as the Wright brothers flying, was impossible until they did it. And then for, I believe it's 4 years, from 1903 to 1907, they were refused a patent for a device that they got in every day that they wanted to and flew up to 50 feet in the air, by the way. So let me also put in there that, I've mentioned this as well. I've had an individual here in Southern California who was an extremely wealthy man. He's still alive. I almost can't believe it. But his family is, sort of deep statey. He publishes a journal that basically exposes them, so he's sort of done with it. He was sort of a Jesse Ventura guy back in the day, climbing around in jungles in the 60s. He's a little older than Jesse, I think. When he took a fancy to me and started mentoring me from the conspiratorial side of things, not from the deep state side of things, but he revealed much to me. And, he was the first guy to ever mention colloidal silver to me. And I went and read on colloidal silver and read all the debunking of it and came back to him and said, well, they said this is poisonous. And he just looked at me across the table. He's like, yeah, and they're going to tell you everything's good for you is bad for you, everything bad for you is good for you. And so he was one of the guys that assisted my wake up, which would have been around 0304. But one day I mentioned this Stan Meyers guy to him, and this guy is very non-emotional. He's very Donald Trumpy. Like, what can I do for you? You're sucking my air, man. You're taking up my time. But he would invite me to breakfast, and we would eat at this fairly well-known place south of here. He owned the building. He owned the whole strip of buildings, and this place is so fancy that just being able to pay the rent means you're doing really, really well. And he owned the place. He drove around. I don't know if he does it now, but he drove around an SUV with no license plate. The cops don't pull him over because he is who he is. They know exactly where he lives. From what I understand, was worth at least $500 million. But you wouldn't know it. He was a guy that never spent any money. But he told me, he goes, yeah. He goes, guys like Stan happen. And he goes, they happen nearly every year. And nearly every year they meet with a demise of some sort. Meaning they don't live anymore. And because anyone who invents something like a perpetual motion engine or something like, fracturing combustible hydrogen out of tap water without an extensive process, anybody who does that, and this has been happening my whole life, the amount of, television, local news reports on farmers that figure this out is at least 4 or 5 in my lifetime that I've seen. But you have to do one thing to build that business. You have to borrow money. Like Tesla had to borrow money. Not Nikola Tesla, but the Elon Musk Teslas of the world have to borrow money to expand their company. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had to borrow money from Fidelity Investment to expand their company. And as soon as you do that, you lose control. So in a traditional sense, most people don't have any income to pursue that sort of thing. But Stan was a farmer. And farmers make millions of dollars. They spend millions of dollars. But he was able to finance his own thing. Now, he did borrow $25,000 from some folks that later sued him for their money back. And I've heard this lawsuit discussed almost entirely different several times in several different places trying to debunk him. One even had the court case files, and it doesn't match what's in Wikipedia at all. Wikipedia's entry on him is really small nowadays. It used to be pretty big. But there was a lawsuit where they said, you promised this engine, we don't see it, and the thing you're using, we're going to have an electrical engineer look at it and validate that at least you got something. They claim to have looked at it, I believe in 1996, and said, oh, this isn't what you said it was. It's using standard electrolysis, and that's not what you're saying that you're doing. Now, here's the rub to this, and here's what's interesting right off the bat for your Wikipedia/Snopes dismissal of this man. His schematics were published on the web, at least by 2010, in several different versions. There were. I haven't pursued this in a while, and I want to come at this as basic as I possibly can, because I've seen a lot, and it was a lot of great information. But there are little communities out there, like communities that, make things, car collectors or inventors, people who whittle things. There are groups out there that have been following who are all PhD level electronic engineers, And they have studied his schematics because he obfuscated them, meaning he basically got the invention drawn down for you, but then he would tamper with words and tamper with things such that there was a little bit of secret sauce that wasn't quite there. And then I have seen hours and hours of videos of people building his fish tank version of his invention that he took to the patent office. Now, when he went into the patent office, they immediately told him, what you're doing is impossible. What you say you're going to try and patent is impossible. And he's like, well, I really started to disappoint you. And this is back in the day when you could smoke inside. And so the way the story goes is that, and this was reported on the news in a face-to-face interview with him. Anybody can say what they want to the news and they will repeat it. But if somebody said that about the patent, said what I'm about to tell you about the patent office, and that clerk is there going, that didn't happen. I've never heard that clerk say this didn't happen. Doesn't mean they know about it, but he shows the machine off on air on this one special that they filmed him in. And he turned this machine on and it starts barfing up hydrogen. And the patent office clerk was intelligent enough to run down the hallway because he wasn't sure that the burper or the way that he was containing this hydrogen layer was safe. And so he runs down the hallway telling everyone to put out their cigarettes because they could have a renegade machine bursting flammable hydrogen into the office. Now, that didn't happen. That wasn't the case. He managed to completely contain that before he brought it down because he's not an idiot. But he was awarded some patents for some of the stuff he did. Now, the first mega detailed article I ever read about his lawsuit was very simple. He hadn't cracked it yet. And the 1996 date must be the amount of time it took to process the case at a later time, because the other suit that I saw was slightly earlier than that. And essentially the investor just goes, look, I want my money back. You haven't done it yet. And he's like, yeah, this is really hard. That's why. So he had to give his money back. Give their money back, I should say. But then the machine was supposedly taken to the Oxford University, and this is where you get this half amp to 650 amp conversion confirmed. And then you have him creating an invention that was utterly brilliant to replace a spark plug. In a average combustion engine in the 90s, you've got a few things happening. You have a little spritzer that's spritzing in the gasoline gas in a little cloud form. You have a valve that's letting a little bit of oxygen in to make sure that there's oxygen inside the chamber above the piston so that it can burn. There's the two ingredients to burn, and then you got your spark plug. And your spark plug does the fire. Boom. You push the piston down, and the gasoline on top of the piston, when the piston comes straight up to the top, it's all synchronized, right? The explosion happens, there's compression, and it's the perfect amount of compression to get the piston to push down, turns the crank, your tires turn, and you're good. That's a very crude version of that, but that's what happens. And so what he did in a brilliant move was that he made a little steel cylinder with his perforation mechanism in it. It looked like a really thick pin. On the back of the pin thingy, it almost looks like a little piston of its own, but there's no moving parts on it from what I understand. But it had the fracturing technology in there, and then just had a tube going out the back to a water tank. And what's really critical about this is it's not some super clean water. It's tap water. Obviously, you could probably put some really hideous water in this thing and it would really struggle. But just normal old tap water was all that he used, and he said you could cross the country in 3.5 gallons of water. And again, there's videos out there. Someone just posted one on our locked Facebook group of a car in Europe in the 60s that was running on water. So this has been done several times without gigantic fuel cell technology, without gas stations that are giving you pure hydrogen. But before he could get this thing to work, so actually, let me finish up. So you would unscrew your spark plug, plug this thing in, just screw it straight into the same exact rivets, which are standard spark plug spacing rivets, right? Not rivets, but grooves, threads, Rivets. Jesus, what am I making Levi jeans here? But then you have to time it properly. And so the thing that he was really, really working on in the 90s was this. I mean, this is the 90s. I mean, you don't have a tremendous amount of off-the-shelf hardware to do this, but he designed a card, looked like a sound card in a PC, and he had a bunch of them, and it's for every single cylinder that's going to be running in your car. And there's videos out there that go for hours where you can see him with this other dude, and they are timing this and timing this and timing this, and you just hear this clicky noise, just da 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 da, and that's the fuel injection system being timed in a computer circuit. And then, of course, you can't afford to have it mess up because then your car doesn't run. Maybe you blow up the engine. And you're going to have to most likely temper the amount of fuel that's created based on how big the engine is. I mean, I've worked on a lot of cars in my lifetime. You know, I can't say that I've seen a 4-cylinder piston versus some, 65 GTO, 8-cylinder, 4-barrel carburetor system. I would imagine that the pistons are a slightly different diameter. Hell, I don't know. It could be less for the 8-cylinder. Hell, if I know. But he was selling this little kit that was a $1,500 retrofit kit to your car. And it was a lot of money back then, but think about it. You start running on water, it's going to end up paying for itself eventually. Now, the mystery around his death has been told so many different ways that I am not personally sure what's correct. What Wikipedia just said was different than anything I ever heard, which he was meeting with some foreign investor people. He was at dinner, and he starts choking, says out loud, "They poisoned me." And then he's running outside, and he falls down on his path outside. Now, the coroner, supposedly, according to Wikipedia, said he died of a aneurysm. Now, I have had numerous people in my friend circle have relatives die of all kinds of different aneurysms. Aneurysms that crawl up your calf, brain aneurysms, and the symptoms and the conditions. And they watched these people die live, just like Stan Meyers died, And I have never heard of anyone having a choking reaction to an aneurysm. I don't know everything about aneurysms. Maybe there's some thing to that, but what I have always heard is usually some sort of headache, some sort of exhaustion. There's a lot of signs that come on even just 10 minutes before this kind of thing takes you out, if you're not dying in your sleep. But they killed him. The way that they described it for years was that he was drinking cranberry juice with his meal, and that's where they believed that poison was slipped in when he looked away. And hey, go watch the documentary on the Iceman who used to keep cyanide in a spray bottle and spray it on. He said, I took a guy out to get a burger, let him know, you got some problems, you pissed some people off, but I'm here to fix the problem. Let's go get a burger. Yeah. As soon as the guy looks away, pulls the bun up on the bun, closes it, on the burger, closes it, and the guy dies right in front of him. He used to do that. So poisoning someone is an ancient art. You know that for a fact, right? Now, since we're going to jump all around, and I think it'll be a little more interesting that way. Stan left behind, obviously, his designs, and from what I understand, again, it's hard to keep track of what is actually true and false because certain people claim to be really close to the family and they write articles. The last intelligible article I read, which had some details that I think are not so sexy as to make them up, but you never know. I'm attempting to bring you the most accurate aggregate of all of his stories so that you may jump in and do some research on this. And we're going to get to the videos I was mentioning in just a second. But it was said that his brother picked up all of his research and moved to Canada and tried to continue it. Now, I don't know what happened to that. It did look like maybe 2 years ago, Toyota had published a design of a brand new engine that when I read the specs of this engine, it's not in any of the cars. It's still very, very secret. but it read just like Stan Meyers' engine. There was a rumor that the brother did sell it to a big buyer, and the buyer remained anonymous. But one of the stipulations was not to shelf it like so many great technologies that the oil industry destroys. Now, Stan was on TV just before his death, and a beautiful piece. You can find it online. I'll try to put some in the descriptions below. But they said on air that he was offered $1.1 billion for his technology. Now, I think Stan Meyers was a profit-oriented man and definitely wanted to make money off of his gig, but I think he also may have just feared, if I sell this, they're going to sit on it and it's never going to see the light of day. Okay. Why would someone with $1.1 billion offer that money to a man who is, according to the 1996 lawsuit on Wikipedia, is blowing smoke up everyone's holes? Let me tell you a little thing about business. Probably the best way to tell this story, but it applies especially to super technical companies that I have tried to start several times. But when you have a film you're trying to sell, and you need someone to invest in your film to get it made, script's great. It's all good. What the studios do, or I should say, really the investors are going to pump the film up and get it made. Let's say it's a Stanley Kubrick, someone who can definitely direct the film, but he needs $150 million, and that money doesn't just fall out of the sky no matter who you are. But what investors will do is they will say, look, I'll give you the back end money, but I won't give you the front end money. And what that means is, it doesn't mean back end profits. It means I want someone else to do the due diligence, because I don't want to waste my time researching something that could be bunk. If your script's horrible, I want someone else to figure that out. I'm not going to spend any money with that. But if you can raise the first $20 million for your script, I'll give you the other 100. But I want to see the due diligence out of the people that gave you the 20. Why do they think this is good? No one on earth would offer anyone any money of any substantial amount, let alone $1.1 billion in the late 90s. I mean, seriously, think about that. Unless they had figured out that this thing was real. According to my contact, of which I haven't seen for 15 years, down south from where I am, this happens all the time. There is a machine. There are methods, multiple methods that one can build to create this effect with tap water and with other things. I'm not sure what the other things are, but he lamented that that was the case, that there are other things. The oil industry is completely aware of these inventions, and because the value of most currency in the world is based on the constant demand of gasoline and oil, they don't want anything to mess with the value of that. Now, some of you might look at that and, you shrug and you go, well, of course, they want to stay rich and they want to stay in control, and obviously that's a beautiful byproduct for them of that horrible little scheme. But you and I spend money, and there is a layer of, well, if this dude were to destroy the value of oil, a barrel of oil, because no one needs it anymore. And Stan Meyers had dealt with lubricating an engine as well. He did a speech on that. All this stuff's online. There may just be people that buy into protecting this infrastructure of the petrol dollar, which is petrol euro, petrol everything, right? Simply because it would cause a world collapse if this solution were to come out too quickly. No one's going to be able to sell ample water. I mean, we drink more water out of water bottles than Stan Meyers would require you to put in your gas tank on any one particular day. Now with a hybrid electric, imagine that. Water's recharging your electric. I mean, that's cool. But this gentleman who I met with several times told me, look, these people get killed. That's basically what he told me. They have accidents. Now, he didn't claim, I just want to be clear, that he ever participated in that sort of thing personally. I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but I think it's way out of his hands. He was an investment guy. It happens way before that. Way before it gets to them. They don't necessarily have to do it. I used to have a thought that, potentially there's rewards for taking care of that as an investment community. But think about it. Killing someone isn't some basic thing. It creates trails, it creates liability, and it breaks the law, and yada, yada, yada. So the first, I think, as the 17-to-do would call it, a proof that this was real, is that someone offered him $1.1 billion, televised on national television. Okay, that for me is pretty legit. The second thing that makes it legit is that his first machine, I never built it personally, but I have seen people build it from scratch in these videos. Even what it is it's essentially, here's how his technique has been explained, okay? Hydrogen has a particular frequency. It's in the 4,000s. And you zap it with that, you zap water with that frequency, and you can extract and free the hydrogen out of the water. But there's a trick to it. You have to prepare this is as I understand, you have to prepare the water molecule to be in a vulnerable state such that when you do perforate it, when you zap it with a little bit of electricity, that it does free itself, that it's actually going to dislodge itself. And so what he did was he created two pipes that are cut like a pipe organ pipe, at an angle. But there's one inside that's slightly smaller in diameter and one on the outside. And as far as thickness on these pipes, they were like a couple of millimeters. I think as long as the electricity travels between these two pipes, because that's what he did. He had one frequency oscillating on the valence of the internal pipe and another frequency that would zap on the outside of the pipe. But I don't know if this is modulating between the two pipes and then all of a sudden there's a giant surge in it and frees this stuff up. But you can sit and watch on this special that aired, I think it was ABC or something like that. He turns that machine on and it's burping up tons of hydrogen. So the other thing is that online you have a group of people who have built that initial engine, and they developed a little turbine that used the hydrogen, just burns the hydrogen, turns the turbine just like a car would, and instead of using an alternator to charge a battery, they just took the energy straight out to their homes. And they have reported from these groups, there's 2 or 3 of them, hell, there's probably a bunch nowadays, that they took their houses completely off the grid. And the power company showed up and said, how the hell are you not taking electricity from us? And they said, yeah, we got this machine we built. You should build one too. Get off the grid. And so what they did was they went to the city and reported these people for having a volatile explosive in their backyard and had the machine ripped out of the backyard. So you have a bunch of those stories for this machine that doesn't work. Now, there are videos I've seen where someone makes the single pipe, and his little instrument in the circular water tank had, probably at least 12.5 or so in there. And man, this thing just burps hydrogen like crazy. But people online have taken this and built the pipe, just one, and they hold it in their hands with a little insulator on the end, and they just put it in a bucket of water, and you can start seeing the hydrogen get created, and as soon as it hits the surface, it bursts on fire. And the guys are like, look, man, this is tap water. I got this doodad. It works. Now, of course, we need to do more due diligence from little videos online to make sure they're not putting in, way more energy to create this hydrogen coming out. But I found this whole thing, OD'd on it, was, shocked and whatever that this had happened and that people didn't say anything, and of course everyone says, well, this is real, the news would cover it, and it's like, now we know fake news is there, we know about Project Mockingbird, blah, blah, blah. So then I saw a brand new, this was probably close to 10 years ago, probably not quite the full 10, town hall meeting about Stan Meyers, and he's long dead by the time this little thing happened, at least probably 12 to 15 years after his death. And this electrical engineer came up and said, you know what? I finally cracked his obfuscation. because he said everyone in this room has built a little pipe machine and you see this work. But when it came to putting it into a car, we couldn't figure out how, through just looking at the diagram and calculating force from an explosion, how this was ever going to have enough force to push down a piston in a combustion engine. It didn't have enough force, according to this guy. And this is all very tough to verify because you'd have to get all the equipment and build the machine. I don't know how much the machine would actually cost to build. I probably have literally a dangerously critical amount of knowledge to build this machine, and because we're dealing with hydrogen, I won't risk it. I might blow myself up because I don't have that full-fledged, I've done things like this a bunch of times, and so you can't do it. But for those of you listening who have these backgrounds, you should jump into it. You can download the non-obfuscated, redrawn PDFs online. There's a ton of websites dedicated to this guy. But what this dude said during his little speeches, he goes, look, we figured out that it's a two-part process to push the piston down. He said one was the explosion that we know is going to take place once this hydrogen is created. But he goes, that was not enough. And there's a 75-25 split. And I want to say that the hydrogen explosion was the 25. But they were missing 75. It was one of those two. And he said, what we found out was the fracturing explosion to create the hydrogen out of the water was the other percentage we were missing. But he never wrote that down. Maybe he didn't write it down to keep it a secret. Maybe he didn't write it down because he thought, well, it's happening. Duh. Who knows? I watched tons of Stan's videos that were the longer, more laboratory videos where he's not narrating much. They're just someone's filming it to prove that it was going on. And again, if you're popping off a scam, I don't know. These videos weren't, like pitch videos. They weren't like, hey, we're trying to raise money. You create a little video to show what you're doing, look scientific, and then we'll raise a bunch of money. There was a point where he didn't really have any money issues. So, what do we do now? Stan's dead. This engine, I think, exists and could be created. Cars are definitely more complicated than they used to be. Could you imagine that the only cars that this stuff really easily works on are the old cars where you could change your own spark plugs? Everyone's trying to find 1995 cars so they could drive it on water. But when I got into Stan, I also got into the other scams that are going on in the oil/automotive industry. And one of the scams was that the electric car craze that, tried to get started several times. Even when I was a kid, there's electric cars out there. One looked like a gremlin that was really teeny. I think it was even featured on one of the Buck Rogers episodes from the late 70s, early 80s. But people have created these amazing batteries. There was an Indian guy here in America who I think was in like Chicago area. Someone did a documentary on him, and he had created this fabrication of a battery, a lithium battery, I believe. Don't quote me on that, okay? But he wouldn't let anyone film the complete process of creating his battery. And he was just talking up a storm about how it was going to change the world. And you see these all the time, or from time to time, if you pay attention to these kind of alternate energy dudes out there. But they get bought up, completely bought up. Meaning, I buy this from you, and you have no say anymore. You can't protest. You're gagged legally for the rest of your life. You can never tell anybody that you made this, and here's a shit ton of money that you can spend for the rest of your life. Okay. Then they sit on it. They destroy it. They never ever make it. They make sure no one else can make it. Because maybe they even, I don't know. I don't know if they patent it because patents are public. And patents run out. So I don't know the details of that. Maybe they don't patent it and they just keep it off the chopping block. But you can write a patent and get it certified to the point it's so freaking hard to understand that you could challenge someone in court, but someone who gets a hold of it's not going to understand it. Like Stan Meyers stuff, right? I had a friend of mine approach me from high school. He had come up with an algorithm to use sound frequency, really more of electronic sound frequency, higher pitch, electrically driven frequencies to metabolize, and I'm going to use the word ether. He never used that. Using it in an egg shape and putting basically a wire inside this egg, vibrating it at the frequency of hydrogen or whatever you're actually looking for in terms of atomic elements, or I should say chemical elements. And he believed that it would create hydrogen if you needed it, or whatever you need. Sort of like the air production unit in the fictional movie Explorers, where the little kids created the force field, and then they created the oxygen inside the force field so they could breathe. It was all being given to them by aliens from space so they could have some friends up there. So they went up and visited the aliens, and they party hardy up there. It's pretty funny. But the one thing that we did, because of Stan Meyers, and again, my buddy was looking for funding. I don't know if he's reliable. He could be a complete liar. He was talking to me and saying that people I do rely on saw that he was being visited by a guy in a white suit, as a matter of fact. I've told this story once before, but he said that he came home one day and there was a white Mercedes parked out front, and the guy called himself Simon. That was the other thing. He said he came back and he found a guy sitting in his backyard on a plastic chair that he had, 4 or 5 of them out there. He was living outside of Phoenix, Arizona at the time. And he said this dude had a notebook of his whole life in there. His past, his present. He told me this story about how the guy was like, I know how many times you brush your teeth, and, just a bunch of stuff to kind of intimidate him. But he also turned the page and revealed that somehow he had gotten a hold of the schematic that my friend had created for this device. And he said, you need to, stop with this project. You're going to be in trouble. Again, I don't know. There was a couple people. As a matter of fact, the person that supposedly works with John Carpenter from my hometown was one of the witnesses that this dude is real, that this guy had shown up 2 or 3 times harassing my buddy. Then my buddy moves back to the Midwest and finally said that he had raised money from an individual overseas in Europe, and that when the money tried to come over to his account, that Homeland Security grabbed it and shut the whole thing down. Who knows? But the reason I mention this is that and I've heard this mentioned several times since then, which is good because the consciousness is starting to rise. If someone knows how to make something like this, a 0-point energy system, or at least you get more out than you put in sort of system that could change the world, what you don't do is what Stan Meyers did. And we bought the domain back in the day. I bought projecthydrogen.com. Pretty cool domain, right? We put the project on there. It no longer exists. So if you go out there, whatever's there is not anything we did. But I said, you're going to publish everything. If I'm going to help you, because he came to me like, dude, you got to help me. And I said, okay. I said, you're going to publish everything you've got. I will personally draw the diagram of the device. And I created a really cool egg logo. It was really awesome, really simplistic and beautiful. But then we published the whole how to build this thing sort of thing. I said, you at no point are going to covet this. At no point are you going to try to profit off this without, just giving it to the world and finding a way to monetize it from there. So he put all together. He had quite a few pages of documentation. And then I reached out to a bunch of people that I thought would understand what he was saying. And I think one of them was actually a Stan Meyers guy. And I invited them to the material. I said, please tear this thing apart if you don't think this will ever work. And that didn't happen. In fact, he got into, my buddy and these people started getting into heavy dialogue, and they were asking questions, and they were saying, look, some people have been down this road that you're going down, and they ran into this obstacle. My buddy would come back with, I thought of that too. This is my correction for that problem. So it went for, probably about 4 or 5 years, until eventually my buddy just, got exhausted from the project, and life caught up with him. I think he got remarried and that kind of thing. I think he even had another kid in his early 40s. And so he got busy and pulled out of it. But what I have heard several times on the web with these sort of projects is exactly what I just said. If you really want to help the world, you can because you have this crazy invention, then just release it already. People get it and build it. And sure, you're going to run into some entitled people that go, well, of course I deserve to have your invention. But you're going to find probably an infinite level of super appreciative people that if you want to get some stuff for free, which is another way of making money, right? Hey, I never pay for anything. Celebrities hardly pay for shit, man. When a celebrity walks into, maybe not the big cities, but even big cities, a celebrity walks into a restaurant, the restaurant's so happy a celebrity's there, they're like, I'm going to put you in a really nice suite. We're going to let some people see you, and maybe make some phone calls to bring down other famous people or other rich people, whatever, to see this famous person in there. And then I'm going to take a photograph with you. With Benny Hanna, took 1,000 photographs with every dude that walked through there that was famous, put them all over all of his restaurants. And it legitimized the restaurant. I mean, even if you think that's sort of corny, it's pretty cool. It means the food's good. These people can go anywhere in the world and are eating Benny Hanna's delicious garlic butter fried rice. But when we say, saving the world, it's interesting. Energy is a kind of a debacle for society. And this is where we kind of get into the danger zone if everybody had free energy to go everywhere. Now, the interesting thing about Stan Meyers' engine, because it's fuel-based, that we don't have to reinvent, technically speaking, all of the engines in the world. We no longer need diesel engines, which operate at a different quality of refined gasoline, and there's no spark plug. It uses a heated piston technique, as I understand it. I don't think I've ever seen inside of a diesel engine as a engine repair rebuild. But turbines that work on jets, that just needs fuel to pour over the turbines, ignite it, and you're just going to have to regulate it so you don't burn the thing up, or you got enough to push the thing around and you got it. So the cool thing about his technique was that it works everywhere right away. But there's a problem with energy and population growth. And this is something that Michael Rupert beautifully uncovered before his apparent suicide in 2014. Actually, it might have been early 2015, excuse me. It was definitely 2015. But he realized that as soon as oil became available and was turned into a mechanism that fueled transportation, the population started exploding. Now, at the same exact time, you do have coal-burning steam locomotives that were also blowing up, and that caused a gigantic explosion. And that's where my hometown was built on Santa Fe Railroad. And so the idea is, if people can move around to places that are inhabited, they will procreate and fill up the gap. And we are not, again, I've talked to some major world experts on this who put it in there, and they always say, look, we're not overpopulated yet, but the rate of population growth is so drastic that it won't be very long before we are totally, elbow to elbow in this place, and that's when influenza will most likely mutate and wipe out a gigantic chunk of the human race. But if nothing else, if that doesn't work, they'll start doing really bad things to people. And that will not be a world we want to live in. But now here's what's interesting. Even though we have to pay for gasoline and we have to pay for jet fuel, there are plenty of people that will pay. We don't like it when gas goes up in price, but you still pay for it and you still get to wherever you need to go. So I think at this point in history, there's not a tremendous amount of movement on the surface of the earth that is being impeded by a lack of energy. If somebody, wants to go to South America or Africa and they really think they can find a place that is unlived in and they could live there and they're not going to get eaten up by all the predators or the locals or whatever, they could do it today. There's not a big deal. So this water engine, even a better system, some Tesla, 0-point energy ethereal engine, if that was created, the only thing that, if for those of you who play World of Warcraft, you're going to know what I'm talking about. If we had anti-gravity so that you could fly anywhere you wanted to, I think we'd have a few homes where we wouldn't normally find them, a few businesses where we wouldn't find them, a few towns where we wouldn't normally find them. Machu Picchu wouldn't be the only place stuck up in the middle of nowhere. Be a lot of that. But we don't have that. But here we are in this sort of awakening of mankind, this Renaissance 2.0. We're starting to wake up. We're starting to smell corruption. And it would seem, although they're trying, man, social credit system right there, but they are trying to develop technology faster than we're capable of recognizing it. And they are trying to make sure technology always hits the realm of control. I have not met a single person who has watched a Boston Dynamics video, I've seen them online, who doesn't see the robots start running around on top of junk piles and the cows and all this other stuff, carrying stuff. Of course, it's being pitched as this will carry supplies for our troops. Again, not a big problem right now. We still fight wars, and we shouldn't be fighting wars, but let's not make wars really super easy to fight. But these robots freak people out. And they freak people out because we have had enough science fiction. And again, if we hadn't had the science fiction movies that we have, we might look at these robots and go, awesome. And, I'm not extremely well read in the science fiction realm. I know some classics. But there have been countless films made where they talk about the uprising of the robots, where they come in, the stages are always the same. The robots come in and they are servants, and they're not that intelligent. They don't have true sentient artificial intelligence. But eventually the neural nets mature, man gets better, creating at least a decent approximation of mankind. And then these things are somehow getting abused by a bunch of ungrateful humans, which I'm sure we can all fantasize about how that's possible. And then the robots fight back, and then we kill the robots, and then we have in this post-robotic apocalypse where the world's not necessarily destroyed, but they're all demonized. You don't make them anymore, and you don't allow them in. There's that Aduma movie that Antonio Banderas made, which is a great example of this. It's a great movie. It's a little dry at the end. It goes a little slow at the end. You kind of see maybe they ran out of the budget. Sort of has the hate humanity spin at the end. And humanity's got some serious environmental problems. There's a little bit of like deep state agendas in there, but overall, he does a fantastic job. The quirky indie way it was filmed is perfect for the tone of the film. So there's one of these questions. The reason why I'm going off on the robot thing is to simply boil to the top the question, which is, I know that you can do this, but should you do this? Now, there's hardly a person on earth that thinks that the oil companies should remain in power, that they should be sultan of this, sultan of that, queen this, king that, politician here, executive there, that should have this incredible amount of infinite money that then can get funneled into all these control apparatus to screw with our lives. Everybody knows that needs to come to an end. Oil's dirty. It barfs crap in the air that you shouldn't breathe. People kill themselves by locking themselves in a car and, closing the garage door and asphyxiating. It happens. If you did that with Stan Meyers thing, the only thing you might do is get steamed to death. Because when hydrogen burns, it just steams. It's beautiful. All the hydrogen cars today have that exact byproduct. You still won't catch me trying to breathe off the pipe, but it's better than a petrol engine, right? But those changes are called disruptors. It's the new keyword of the 21st century investment community. This is a major disruptor. And the answer is yeah, that's as big as it gets, baby. You take oil out of cars, it's huge. Now, before I move on, I need to loop back on the question where someone might say, but what about lubricating the parts inside the engine? Stan claimed that by the mid-50s, that the automotive industry had figured out how to treat steel with petroleum in such a way that it remained slick to the touch for its lifetime. Now, that may not be truly an infinite solution, but it would be for the life of the car in general. So they could treat the crankshaft, the crankcase, everything that's moving with this technique, and you have slick steel. And I believe I've actually touched a sample of this, and you touch the steel, and it feels like you've got grease on your hands, but then you touch your hands and you don't have any grease on your hands. It's an interesting technique. But he just blew it off at a meeting once, and like this has been in existence forever. And in the meeting, he was holding his piston thing, his little perforator plug things. It was cool. And in there's one video out there where he's popping the hoods of cars that he's retrofitted with this engine. That's the other thing for this being a big scam. It's like, really? It's working. There wouldn't be a price tag on a scam because someone at $1,500, everybody has $1,500 in the 90s. Jesus, your personal computers at home were $3,500. So if someone got $1,500, sure, man, boom, there's $1,500. Do my car, thanks. Now, what I don't know is of the cars that were demonstrated in this one video, where he has dune buggy over there and these other cars, I don't know if anyone has them still. Do they still exist? Does someone get them, pick them up, crush them? Who knows? If you know more than me, then, which is not hard, definitely leave it in the comments section. But a gigantic disruptor like this is something that I think that the layman, like me, would just jump on and go, hell yeah. And there's an impulse and an instinct to say, hell yeah, screw everybody. Let's just see what happens. And maybe you destroy yourself. Maybe you destroy the life of your children and your grandchildren because you've thrown the economy into chaos. Now, a lot of you economists out there, even if you're what the professionals might call an amateur economist, doesn't mean you don't know everything that needs to be known, might simply say, well, we get off this petrodollar and go back to the gold currency. Ah, there you go. If that's the case, if that truly solves the problem of the petrodollar, instead of artificial demand on a product, then that might be the thing that has to happen first. And this is where, again, planning provides the bedwork for the whole thing. There's this, after I released my 17 episode, I ran into, quite a few dissenters and a lot of great comments about it. But one of the things that I found really frustrating was that they said, well, he's saying everything that all the people that have said in the past have said. And I kind of covered this in the episode, but the idea is, okay, so a bunch of people lied in the past, and they have to use words that sound like they're telling the truth, otherwise the lie isn't ever believed, and they never get any change, and they don't get in the history books for being some of the most corrupt bastards on planet Earth to have ever lived. The problem is if the Aesop fable of the boy calling wolf tires everyone. I mean, think about this. In the Aesop fable of the boy that called wolf, the only thing that the story said at the end was, don't lie and call wolf, because eventually no one will believe you. It's a credibility moral uptick at the end. But the thing is that the kid did it 3 times, as I remember the story, and no one believed that kid. Not anyone who yells wolf. You have to find people with decent integrity, people who do what they say. They run on a campaign of a bunch of promises, whether you agree with them or not. And when they get into office, they do exactly what they said they were going to do. All right. At least you got someone that you can trust. Like Malcolm X said, rather have a guy call me the N-word to my face than to pretend they like me and say it behind my back, because at least I know who my enemies are. So there's this huge pressure to fix the whole world in 4 years. It's nuts. It can't happen that fast. I wish it could. It can't. Not without God being here and waving a magic wand. Now with electricity, they love it because we're still buying the electricity in units. We still subscribe to the few sort of draconian ways that we create electricity. Again, I have a very close friend of mine. He's in his, he's probably almost 70. he spent 40 plus years creating power plants and for either a major factory that needed to create, Q-tips, and so you create the factory's energy system to run all the machines, because buying power from the local power company is just not economical in the overall business model. But he told me that we stopped building hydroelectric plants in America by the mid-'70s. Well, who do you think made that stupid decision? The oil companies lobbied the politicians to turn it off. And so we buy hydroelectric from Canada and ship it down here through the wires, right? Electricity as it exists today, in its way it's manufactured in the United States of America. Can't speak for any other country, don't know. It's crazy. Nuclear power plants are crazy because of the toxicity of the water that comes out of these places that we have to bury in the ground for however many zillion years. And I know that some of you don't think this stuff exists because you don't believe fission can happen. I don't know what to tell you, man. There's plenty of sort of Brockovich lawsuits based on burying these barrels of toxic water out of power plants. These things exist, right? It's not like you go inside the power plant or the atomic power plant and there's like a little gas motor in there and there's guys pulling it, bring me some more diesel fuel. It's got rods and these meshes that then are put in the perfect proximity to create fission, boil water, turn a turbine, and send electricity out the door. Even if Fukushima was a setup, who knows? It demonstrates the problem. Chernobyl demonstrates the problem. 3 Mile Island demonstrated the problem. So the first one is, of should we do something like this, is to make sure we take care of our monetary system. We know it's all screwed up and needs to be fixed anyway, regardless of anyone creating this engine. The second, more impactful social consequence would be if we did introduce this fairly free energy system, which is water. It's not completely free, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper than a barrel of oil. Would we, one, affect the price of water? Two, would we create a gigantic population explosion for certain areas of the world? Maybe all the first world countries of the world run no simulation risk of increasing their population due to energy being available, because again, everybody can get anywhere in America with a tank of gas, and no one's I would say limiting their spawning desires due to a tank of gasoline. It's just not a problem. So maybe that's not a big one for us personally. Maybe in Africa it would be gigantic. Maybe they would have 1 billion people in 10 years if they had free energy to move around. Who knows? I don't know. Something we have to examine. If Stan Meyers' story is true, then I have a certain soft spot for people in history that have done that. And if my friend, I should say more acquaintance, that claimed that this happens multiple times every decade and that these individuals are essentially exterminated off the face of the planet one way or the other, then I have the same feeling for them. These individuals have, on one side of their merit, the invention inside them to figure it all out, and that is something serious. Think about the Wright brothers. Think about them trying to create the wing, the perfect wing to fly, and trial and error, and then flying this thing for the first time. I think they said that the photograph they took in 1903 shows one of the brothers about what they approximated to be about 48 feet in the air. Well, that's way up there, man. What's my house? My house is maybe 15, 20 feet tall with the peak of the roof. You can double that and add 10 more feet. I mean, that's huge. That's a really hell of a flight. And he could die. He could have died creating that thing. But thankfully, they didn't die. Thankfully, they went to the French, I think it was a World's Fair, and flew. And then America finally went, oh, yeah, we'll totally patent this because we don't want the French to patent it first. And supposedly there was some shenanigans with the time zone stamping of the patent because we're in an earlier time zone than France, and that's how they supposedly got it. The big scam with the Wright brothers, and a buddy of mine wrote a film called First, which is just beautiful, was that The military wanted to get the patent, and they never wanted to pay two brothers anything. And so they actually sent infiltrators down to their labs and tried to siphon off something by just pure observation, and were fortunately never able to do that. How many places have you seen in this world that you would have never seen had you not ridden on a plane? Now, some places you might say, well, I just would have driven my car. But I don't know, maybe I would take a trip to Hawaii on a boat. Maybe. I don't know if I'd ever go to Australia. I don't know if I'd ever go to Europe. I guess I'd probably go to Europe at least once on a boat. We're talking about, weeks worth of journey with a modern boat. So these individuals are special individuals. Some of them, like the Wright brothers, are able to fight a 4-year battle after the battle of inventing the thing in the first place and get rewarded for it in history. Others, like Stan Meyers, die. Now, maybe he died of an aneurysm. It was just super bad luck. Then the epitaph of his story is, don't covet. Don't covet your invention for profiteering. Let the world have it. And we're not talking about a little tiny toy, some elective invention that nobody really needs. Yeah, patent that thing, make yourself a ton of money. Have some fun. Whether it be software, hardware, whatever it is. A new ShamWow. A sham, oh my God. How about that? Now, to close this thing off, I want to remind you of something that was brought up by Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. Dr. Stephen Greer is actually a physical doctor who worked ERs for a long time. And it doesn't really matter who this guy is, but I just want to kind of say, in case people are like, oh, the Disclosure Project's all bullshit. Like, yeah, maybe it is, but this statement is right on the money. I've said it several times, and I got it from him. Because once I heard him say it, I was just baffled of how easy what he said blew my mind, and the fact that I don't hear it anywhere, ever, And that is that he said, regardless of what the laws of physics say you can do. And when I was a child, they told me that top fuel drag race cars hitting 300 miles an hour as quickly as they did with as much mass as they are built out of was said to be impossible, but they did it, and they exceeded way beyond what was said to be possible. And I don't know if anyone actually said that, but I've heard it 2 or 3 times in my lifetime. But Dr. Greer said, look, why isn't a single country in the world dedicating itself to creating a zero-point energy system for the world? Now, some people might just lean on, the Zeitgeist movie and the geothermal electric plant, especially as Caltech initially designed it, which doesn't bring up toxic chemicals from the bowels of the earth, which is what the power companies have done when they build these things. They build them to be very inefficient to prove that what they've done is the way that we should keep everything. Why not? But why isn't that the case? I mean, seriously, the dude's on the money with this statement. Kennedy goes up and says, we're going to put a man on the moon and return him back safely in 10 years. Okay. Well, I don't believe that actually took place, but hey, the dude's mind was in the right frame of mind. Let's do something extraordinary. Let's do it. Because you guys don't think you can, is exactly the reason why we should. If there are laws in the book of thermodynamics that say you can't do this, well, screw those. Let's just do it anyway. And stop saying that you can't. Because the second you believe a paradigm of something you can't do, then you don't do it. Why do you think communistic countries are allowed to exist on planet Earth? Because, just like they said in Westworld Season 2, they remind us of the old story of why does the elephant that's as big as a house obey the rope around his neck pushed into a little stake in the ground? Why doesn't he pull that up and walk off? And the story goes is that when the elephant's a child, he is bolted down with a rope that's strong enough that when he tries to get away, he can't. And he never undoes that limitation from his mind. And so even though he's big as a house and could easily just walk away with that thing, he doesn't. Why does South America want to migrate to North America? Outside of any racist thing that might be going on in some people's minds, it's because they don't think they can change their country. Some people are convinced that the tyranny that they're in is what they want. They get Stockholm Syndrome to their nation. And that's a different area of the world. So we know that changing our brains from impossible to possible is the name of the game. My old slogan for my life was, I'm attracted to the impossible. When people tell me in technology that things can't be done, I'm there. And I've only run into one invention that I couldn't solve for the problem, which was when I created with my team at my video game company. There's only about 4 of us. We worked with LL Cool J to create his online music studio. Cool J wanted it to be possible for 5 guys to be in 5 different places singing harmony. And they all got the feed at the exact same time, and they could all hear their own voices at the exact same time. And currently, I think at some point we're going to be able to pull this off, but it'll be a few hundred years from now where we get some sub-ether wave band to make it happen. But we're going to have something travel faster than the speed of light, and then to electronically transfer the bits, the binary bits, or even the analog signal from one place to another, so everyone's getting this so quickly that even if there's a micro delay, the software can adjust it at everyone's client side to make sure everyone feels like they're singing in the same room. When we talk on the phone with people overseas, there's still a tiny delay. Certain solutions on the internet have a tiny delay. Depends on if the internet's really busy. It's pretty damn awesome how amazing things are, but even 50 milliseconds was enough to break the software. We had to write special software and get special hardware and special drivers to bring it down to 15 milliseconds. That was as close as we could do it with you sitting in front of the computer, wrapping it over a track and making sure that the mic went down to the operating system, gave the operating system a copy, and then brought the other part of the signal back up to your ear instantaneously. That's a 15 millisecond travel time. So those are some problems you can run into. We know Tesla was onto something. He had proven it in Colorado Springs. He built this big antenna to broadcast electricity everywhere. He was onto something. They tore it down. Then they erased the guy from the history books. Sounds a bit like Stan Meyers, doesn't it? I guess in closing, let's just think about Tesla for a second. Because I've run into this conversation a lot lately in people in my physical life. We'll sit around every once in a while and people will say, I got a friend of mine who's a very technical guy. I wouldn't say he has an electronics degree, but we sat around and, he was saying, isn't it weird? He goes, I went all the way through school and college and no one ever told me that Nikola Tesla existed. And that's a crime. That's a crime. There's no excuse. There's no excuse why you have to ingest miles of Albert Einstein constantly and you never hear about Tesla. And, there's two or three different tiers of knowing about Tesla. One, you're not to know the guy's name, so you'd never look anything up, and that's obviously changing. 2, if they let you know his name and you have a conversation about him, they'll just say, oh yeah, he invented alternating current, and he discovered and invented wireless technology, although there was a guy in Europe who was also doing around the same thing, but Tesla had, I think, a few more resources at his fingertips, and he had industry at his fingertips, and so he was able to be responsible for it metabolizing into companies that we use all our technology on right now. But the third tier of Tesla, as I button up this season 4 here, because I know what the next episode is going to be about that I have to record, and then season 4 is over, is ether. Ether is something you're not supposed to know about. You're supposed to think it doesn't exist. But it exists. It's what all of his inventions were based on. He said it many times in his writings. All of his predecessors, except for maybe Edison, he didn't give a shit. But all the discoverers of electricity talked about ether, and that was the basis of all of their inventions. It was the basis of how they knew electron works, how electron exists. But you're not to know that. So if you're going into Stan Meyers and you're reading about the dissenting voices saying that he was a fraud, I hope this episode will help you sort of do a little bit of logic and say, well, if that was a fake, then why didn't anyone offer him $1.1 million? If that was a fake, why does he randomly die at a dinner with a couple investors? And why are people able to build portions of his invention and get it to work? Why do people with massive degrees 10 to 15 years after he's dead say, Eureka, I got it. I got it. I figured this out. I know what he was hiding. And all the math makes sense. If you have something like this, or you rediscover someone else's previous project and you have an indication in your laboratory, meaning it's doing what they said it would do, then you need to make yourself an extremely public figure. Duplicate your materials, upload them everywhere. If you're going to do a YouTube video showing off what you did, that's not enough. You got to release the schematics. You got to mail them to people that are on the same journey. And yeah, sure, the 5 aisles will see you do it the second you do it. But in the end, you will have neutralized any ability they have to stop you because you put it in the public domain. It's potential that you could file a patent and then file it into the public domain. Here's the patent, folks. Here's how it works. It's not going to be in legalese talk where you're not going to understand what the hell I'm talking about. You won't obfuscate anything. And again, hopefully, just like one could make a Baghdad battery, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago or more, whatever you've invented, whatever that is, a little kid could put it together. If they just had the clothespin and the rubber band and whatever the hell else they need, right? A little bit of alcohol, whatever you need to make whatever you're building. Do a deep dive on Stan Meyers and let me know what you think. Pros, cons, you think he's a fraud, whatever. If you do want to accuse him of being a fraud, I don't have any problem with that, but do me a favor. Really qualify your engineering background and don't quote back to me the first 2 laws of thermodynamics. Blood, like duh. We all know that exists, and again, those are put in place to keep you down. Try to go beyond that. Look at the videos of people making these things. Once you look the dude up, and again, I don't know if they've scraped a bunch of videos off the web. I haven't done a huge deep dive recently. I'm pretty sure that there's websites out there that you can find this stuff on. Maybe you can't find it on google.com. Who knows? Maybe you have to go to some other search engine to find it. It's not part of the controlled information highway. Let me know what you think. I think that's about all I got for that one. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. That's where you get all the links to this show in all of its forms. So there's a couple video choices. There's social media choices. We have a locked Facebook group with a great group of people. And I want to say, too, I've said this once before, inside episodes, but some of our folks have tremendous backgrounds in technology. And so you might come in and go, hey, guys, this looks real to me. Is this real? Maybe you want to question whether or not a video you've seen looks like it's CG or not. We have some CG experts in there. We have engineering experts and all this other stuff. I recently had a guy text me on Facebook chat because he was talking to someone else online, and I use an account to talk to my Deep Thoughts Radio page on Facebook called Deep Mind, and someone had created an account called Deep Mind Inside. I don't know who this person is. But the guy asked me this web development question, and I was looking at this going, well, that's a really interesting that someone would come to me for what, because I say I do it on the show. And I was like, well, I could probably get into this and help you, but I don't know what you're talking about, And so I linked over to where he had this previous conversation because he included the link, and I was like, oh, you got the wrong dude. But if you give me some more information, I might be able to help you. It's kind of funny. I just thought of a little funny challenge there. One of the other things on the site is a way to donate to the show. Again, if you even just put $1 in Patreon, you'll get these links before anyone else gets them 9 times out of 10. And so you can watch them the second that you start getting uploaded. So I upload things and I leave them in a unlisted format until I at least get a better encoding of it. A lot of times, though, I notice that what YouTube is doing to probably save a lot of money on the back end, and it's actually a pretty sound theory, is that a video, they don't want to encode a video at higher resolutions if no one is watching the video. So sometimes I have to release it to start getting the 720p, 1080p, and the 2160 4K to encode. And the 4K actually takes several days to come about sometimes. So there are certain videos that for whatever reason they got a bug on their end and they never encoded it up from the basic 360p, which is, or 320p or whatever the hell it is, just this horrible low-res format. So I think the episode on vacuums got uploaded and it never encoded properly. So it's just a little bit low res. But anyway, the audio from the podcast and the audio from the YouTube are exactly the same because I create them from the same product. That's something I've never answered. Someone asked me that once. And there's also the new remastered season 1. So season 1, when I first recorded it, was very rough. The microphone was like, an inch from my mouth. And so it just sounds awful. Plus, I was just getting my groove down. I didn't know how to do anything really well. And I had a lot of idiosyncrasies when I talked. And so there's a lot of knows, and all kinds of weird stuff I've been able to train myself out of for the most part. But if I end up doing it nowadays, I cut it out of the video before you ever hear it in most cases. So anyway, go up there, take a look, get your fill. Season 4 is coming to a close. I'm going to take about a month and a half off for those of you who want to know. But I will be back with a brand new season 5. Another 100 videos, hopefully. Anyway, until then, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.